Hey everybody, Vanessa here. Super excited to roll out this Fit Tip Under 10 all about disordered eating. So let's dive right in. So cool, let's dive right in. So today's Fit Tip Under 10 is all about disordered eating, brought to you by, of course, Right to Fitness. Here we go. Cool. So what is disordered eating? I've been using this term a lot in a lot of my posts, but before we even dive into kind of breaking it apart, diving into it a little bit more, we need to really understand what is disordered eating. And what it is it really is a descriptive term used in describing a range of irregular eating behaviors that may or may not warrant a diagnosis of a specific eating disorder. So this is different than an eating disorder, which many of you guys are familiar with: anorexia, bulimia, binge eating. These are all diagnosed, and they have to be diagnosed by a medical professional. So disordered eating is very, very different from it being, because it's just describing irregular eating patterns. However, you guys are going to find, hopefully in this presentation, that disordered eating can actually lead to eating disorders, or really just lead to just this really super unhealthy relationship with food, which is one of my major goals as a health and fitness professional, as a coach, is to really break down these irregular eating patterns. Because I would say, like I said, I would say 99% of the women that I work with have a little bit of disordered eating, and I personally have suffered from this myself. So it's really important to talk about and kind of break this down a little bit. But the most significant difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating is whether or not a person's symptoms and experience align with certified and defined by the American Psychiatric Association. So again, this is what I was talking about. Those are the main differences there. And the tough thing with disordered eating patterns is they really don't fit into this eating disorder criteria. And so it's really tough to really understand and really get help for disordered eating, because it's not really recognized, by these by medical professionals. And if it's not fitting the criteria of an eating disorder, it's really hard to recognize. But it is so important to recognize these patterns so that you guys can have a better relationship with food and really just begin to understand, how to manage your weight. And that all begins with understanding your relationship and the mental component that really food and nutrition plays a role in many people's lives. So again, these patterns deserve some attention and treatment, as they may turn into more problematic eating disorders and put individuals at risk of serious health problems. So I'm going to go over kind of all of the symptoms of disordered eating, and you guys are going to see how potentially that could negatively affect someone's overall health. So some symptoms and some maybe triggers that you maybe can identify with here are frequent dieting. So always trying to lose weight, anxiety associated with specific foods. I hear a lot about this with carbohydrates specifically. People fearing carbohydrates, thinking they're going to make them lose weight. Chronic weight fluctuations, so having big weight fluctuations from week to week can really be a sign of disordered eating. Rigid rituals and routines surrounding food and exercise. This is a big one. Feeling of guilt and shame associated when you eat anything. Preoccupation with food, weight, and body image that negatively impacts quality of life. I think this is probably the most powerful and really defines disordered eating. When you think about food, maybe it's occupying all of your time. Maybe you're having anxiety with that. Maybe you're negatively affected, when you eat food and thinking, that you're calling yourself fat or whatever those that negative self-talk is. And again, maybe it negatively impacts your quality of life. Feeling of loss of control surrounding food, including compulsive eating habits, using exercise, food restriction, fasting, or purging to make up for bad food choices. Ladies, I'm here to tell you that any food that you eat is not a bad choice. Food is fuel. It's just about kind of rewiring your brain and looking at food a little bit differently. Skipping meals. So maybe you have a really big meal on a Friday night, so then you choose to skip breakfast and lunch. Again, this kind of perpetuates the irregular eating patterns. Avoiding a type of food or food group. Again, I kind of talked about carbohydrates, and then using something like laxatives, diuretics, enemas or misusing enemas or diet pills to kind of negate the food or the calories that you consume. many of my clients, all of my clients actually, we don't start with doing any counting calories or anything like that. We really just talk about food, how it fuels your body, and kind of working through a lot of these fears, because these fad diets really just perpetuate, they kind of fall into this. Let's take keto, for example, right? It's no carbohydrates. So to me, and there are benefits to keto, maybe that's a whole nother fit tip, but to me, what that's doing is just, kind of giving you permission to avoid carbohydrates and not working through those fears and understanding how carbohydrates are beneficial. Or maybe you get you're on a fad diet that sends you a lot of pre-packaged items, right? So you're kind of dieting and not really understanding how your body works with food and kind of working through these disordered eating patterns. So really important to really think about those symptoms. And if you are experiencing any of them, again, working with a health coach, chatting about them with a friend can be super, super helpful. So again, oftentimes weight loss and fad diets, they don't take people's individual requirements into consideration. And this is huge. A lot of these big companies, Optavia, Weight Watchers, Herbalife, even Noom, if you've ever experienced that, they start everybody out at a similar place, right? And it's very usually low calorie, super low restrictive, again, maybe even eliminating food groups altogether. And all that does is makes people feel hungry. They experience low moods. Maybe they lack energy. And then, with that, if your energy is low, developing poor mental health and physical health. So it's really important that you guys steer away from those types of fad diets and really start just working on building a relationship with food and finding somebody that can help support you and give you what's right for you. So over here on the right-hand side is just this awesome graph that I found, just talking about the diet cycle. And this is where I feel people really get stuck and really create these disordered patterns, throughout their lifetime. So they pick a diet and it's usually really restrictive. So then that leads them to be feeling deprived physically and physiologically. Then they break the diet of the rules. So they binge or they overeat because the diet is so restrictive. Then they feel guilty and confused about how to eat. They blame themselves, think they just need to do better or be more motivated or have more self-control. And then, of course, that leads to no change in managing their weight. And then they're unhappy with their weight and shape. And then the cycle continues. So they go back to finding something restrictive or maybe starting on a Monday, and just kind of starting this pattern again. And this cycle is super hard to break. Again, I personally have experience with this, and it's just very hard to get out of this mentality, get out of this diet lifestyle, and really look at overall what you as a person and as an individual needs. So some things that I can recommend for disordered eating. Again, this is different from eating disorders, but it's super important to identify if you are experiencing any disordered eating patterns, because those disordered eating patterns can lead to eating disorders or just generally feeling not good about yourself, right? Maybe that means low energy, lack of good body image, low sex drive could be a big thing with all of this, constantly depriving yourself of food. So what I can recommend for you guys is really finding some professional help. And some helpful professionals to work through this could be a psychologist, a licensed counselor, a registered dietitian, a nutritionist, and even a nutrition coach. Because a person exhibiting disordered eating habits and behaviors oftentimes don't really know that they're experiencing that, or they're in that kind of diet cycle. And it seems like there isn't any hope, and it almost takes a moment. Hopefully anybody who's watching this can kind of look at those symptoms and really reflect and identify, like, if you have any disordered eating patterns. But my personal experience is many clients are unaware that those patterns are problematic or even harmful. I have a lot of my clients talk to me about like overeating, and then they say, should I fast? Should I skip a meal? And those are the patterns that I, as a coach, help them work through. Even, using the scale to justify their eating the next day. If it's up, they eat less. If it's down, they tend to eat more. So these patterns are super, super important to break through. And it oftentimes takes a professional to really pinpoint them and help them work through these hurdles. And this is like one of my personal favorite things to talk about. And one of the things that I absolutely love working with my clients on and helping them work through these disordered eating patterns, just kind of pointing them out and really changing their life with kind of rerouting their patterns, their habits, their behaviors, the way that they look at food can be super, super beneficial. All right, ladies, and that is all for me and disordered eating. If you have any questions, please comment below or subscribe to our YouTube channel for more information. And thanks for joining.